My presentation today, Working to Perennialize Agriculture in Wisconsin and Beyond, is about the work of the Savannah Institute, a nonprofit organization based here in Wisconsin and in Illinois as well, where we work primarily. So I'll provide today a fairly brief overview of our purposes and activities, and I anticipate that that will hopefully raise questions from folks who would like to learn more. And so I anticipate having some time at the end of the presentation for questions as well, and look forward to that. So with that, let me begin by talking about the big picture here. What do I mean perennializing agriculture? Our vision at the Savannah Institute is perennializing in the sense of working to provide more opportunities for agriculture to be based on perennial crops, which are crops that don't need to be replanted each year, but continue year after year. Many crops that we're familiar with: apples, alfalfa, asparagus, as well as new emerging crops, which aren't always new, but might be emerging in terms of their commercial viability. And so we work on expanding the basis of that commercial viability for perennial crops, which I'll talk about through the course of the presentation. But why are we doing this? And we mean perennialize in a social sense as well, in the sense of being long-lasting and of deep value. And so we believe deeply in agriculture that's in it for the long haul, and believe that Wisconsin agriculture has shown many times throughout its history the ability to change and to adapt as circumstances change. And there's a call for doing things differently as we learn and grow in our communities in Wisconsin. And there's many great examples of that. One that I really appreciate is going back 125 years as we transitioned from being a state where wheat was one of our primary crops to the advent of being the dairy state. And that was a change that a lot of different parties were involved in, from the university system to famous Hordes dairymen and their publication, and a lot of local farmers and actors working together to make dairy a part of the state and to make agriculture something that was vital and viable. And there's a long and proud history of that. And so we think that that by continuing that tradition, that we can meet the challenges of the future. And so that's some of what I'll be talking about today. We see is one of the fundamental challenges for agriculture and land use in Wisconsin and beyond is that we've gotten ourselves to a state of affairs where, in many cases, we have very hard boundaries between agricultural land, the conservation land that's a part of farms, and what we think of as nature, which is often off somewhere else. And our thought and what we work towards is, how can we continue to improve agriculture so that conservation isn't something that we just do on the side of it. You'll have to pardon me, it just is a good time for a train to go by my house, of course. So forgive me in advance. I'll just try to talk through it, but please let me know if you need me to back up. So we look at what are the crops that we can grow and the cropping systems that we can develop, where the outcomes of those provide us not just the productivity and the yield that we need, which our agricultural systems have become remarkably productive, but how do we also yield the clean water and the stable soil and the carbon sequestration and the wildlife habitat that we need, not just on the edges of our farms and the places we set aside, but in the very areas that we're doing our agriculture. And so our main strategy for trying to achieve these ends is something called agroforestry, which is a combination, as you can probably tell from the word, of agriculture and forestry. And of course, Wisconsin is a great place for this because we have both strong agricultural and forestry sectors. And so looking at ways to integrate trees and perennial crops onto farms can do a number of things for farms. It can offer a natural climate solution. It can improve water quality. It can diversify and extend farm incomes, improve biodiversity. And this is really important to support healthy rural communities. I didn't take an opportunity to introduce myself at the beginning here, but I grew up in southwestern Wisconsin, in Crawford County, near Gays Mills and Soldiers Grove, and so ways in which vital farming communities is really important to the health of rural Wisconsin is very important to me. And I might also add that earlier in my career, I had the opportunity to work at DATCAP and provide support for farmers all across the state. So it's a special treat for me to be able to, and an honor to come back and speak with the DATCAP Land and Water Conservation Board here. So once again, grateful for the opportunity here. So to tell you a little bit about what agroforestry is, the USDA has 5 practices that are well known as agroforestry practices. There are a lot of different ways to do this, but I'll give you the overview here. Alley cropping is essentially bringing the forest into the farm field. So planting rows of trees widely spaced and continuing to grow crops or have pasture in between those rows of trees as they mature. And then forest farming, which is bringing the farm into the forest and raising things like ginseng, golden seal, mushrooms, or other specialty crops under a forest canopy. Other forms of agroforestry include riparian buffers, windbreaks, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with, and silvopasture, which is the use of trees in pasture systems for a variety of purposes, from providing shade or winter shelter for livestock to the trees being supplemental crops as well, or providing supplemental forage for the livestock, and a number of different ways that trees can be used in pasture systems. And as I mentioned, one of the key reasons for doing this is that agroforestry is a very important natural climate solution. And this is getting a little bit too into the weeds, this figure here, but I wanted to just point out this is a recent paper that came out, and a lot of the scientific literature has continued to point towards agroforestry as one of the places where we can have the most impact on getting carbon out of the atmosphere and pulling more of it down into the biosphere, which is to say, of course, our farms are all powered by photosynthesis, that's exactly what photosynthesis does. And so without going too far into the details here, I'll just note that among all the different natural climate solutions that have been evaluated, agroforestry is among the most important in terms of how much carbon we can actually sequester on a cost-effective basis. Right up there with soil carbon in our croplands and in our grasslands. And then this big bar underneath agroforestry here is biochar, actually. So a number of natural climate solutions that are connected with agriculture sequestering carbon, which is this big bar here. And I think that increasingly so we're going to be looking to farms to help get us out of the climate problems that we're deeply in. So I can say more about that, but that's an overview of one important aspect of agroforestry. Improving water quality, something I know that this board is deeply committed to and working on. There's a lot of great literature on how agroforestry can improve water quality through forested buffers, and that can reduce runoff. Phosphorus loss can be reduced even compared to grass buffers, and in grazing systems, again, through silvopasture. And these improvements can continue to multiply over years as trees mature as well. Building economic and ecological resilience, as I said, this is something that's very important to me personally. And at the heart of it, what we're working to do is to provide more options for farms that are viable. In the previous discussion, talking about the loss of dairy farms in Washburn County and my home county of Crawford County and many counties across the state, of course, that's been the case. And so what are the next crops? You know, as we've lost tobacco, as dairy, at least on small and medium-sized farms, has declined, what are the crops that can provide higher value on smaller acreages and mid-sized farm acreages? And we think that as farms diversify and add more crops that have an economic basis, that improves the resilience of our farms and communities as well. And then diversity also brings with it ecological resilience. As weather changes, as other circumstances changes, there's more to fall back on, essentially. So a little bit about how the Savannah Institute goes about this. We work on what we call systems level change. So trying to understand and then affect what are the real building blocks of making these kind of changes that we're aiming for. And so our mission to catalyze the development and adoption of resilient, scalable agroforestry starts with the crops themselves, the tree crops. And so we work on crop breeding and crop improvement to develop and improve productive, resilient tree crops, both for human food as well as for livestock feed. And then we also work to develop the supply chains that make these crops viable for farms to adopt and to raise. We work on farming systems as well. So most crops are not grown in isolation, but they're grown in rotation and integration with other crops, as well as with livestock. And then there's the economic resilience of how do these farming systems work on an enterprise budget and a farming system level. And so that's an area of our work as well. And then, of course, nothing happens without the people that make it happen. And so we work with a wide variety of stakeholders, especially farmers. We work a lot with the research community, scientists of various sorts. And then we work with landowners who aren't farmers, absentee and non-farming landowners, with investors who want to bring capital to the table to help make this happen. And then the wide variety of other stakeholders who connect the dots and make things happen, including consumers. And our vision is that by bringing all these pieces together, we'll help advance a multifunctional agriculture, which is based on agroforestry systems that integrate trees, crops, and livestock to help provide those things that we all need, in addition to productive agricultural systems, ecological resilience, climate stability, economic prosperity, and vibrant communities. So I'll run through some of our programs, again, just at a high level to give you an overview and an introduction, and then we'll be interested to discuss if folks want to learn more about any particular aspect of our work. So our programs span education and outreach. I'll tell you a bit about what type of education and outreach we do. We work on technical support for agroforestry adoption, so that's working with landowners and farmers to put agroforestry into practice. We have a demonstration farm network where we manage agroforestry systems that provide people an opportunity to see agroforestry in action, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We have research and commercialization programs, R&D essentially, to push things forward. And one of those commercialization efforts that I'll mention is a business that we recently spun off called Canopy Farm Management. So I'll tell you a little bit about those program areas. Our education and outreach programs include an apprenticeship program where we pair farmers in training with mentor farmers, and those apprentices spend a season on those farms learning, and we provide support for the mentors and provide some curriculum for the apprentices and some community building as well, so that the mentors and the apprentices can learn from each other. We have a series of online courses. Those are all available free for the public, so I encourage you to find those on savannahInstitute.org if you'd like to learn more about the nuts and bolts and the purposes of agroforestry. We have a series of field days, webinars, and conferences. We haven't published our field day calendar for this season ahead yet, but I encourage you to, if you'd like to be abreast of that, sign up for our newsletter, which comes monthly by email. And then we have a wide variety of educational media and resources, including a video series that you can find on our website as well. I'll also mention later on, but just to say it now, on Friday we happen to be having our annual perennial farm gathering. It's the 9th annual event, and that's our big annual hoo-ha. So that's virtual this year, so anybody can join, and it's by free will donation. So you can tune in for a little bit or all of it as you like. I mentioned our technical support program. This is one-on-one technical service for farmers and landowners to help people assess their farm and their land base, to discern if agroforestry could help them meet their goals, and if so, how, what type of agroforestry, and to develop plans to do that, and then to help access, along with that technical assistance, financial assistance, primarily from the NRCS, various cost share programs that can support agroforestry implementation and planning on farms. And so we have staff who can provide these services free of charge in southern Wisconsin, the Fox River and Sheboygan River watershed, and in large parts of Illinois as well. And that's provided from grants through the NRCS, as well as others that we have staff who are able to provide these services. And so encourage those of you who work with farms and clients in these geographies to connect them with us. And we have staff who are dedicated to working with farmers in these places and landowners. The Wisconsin NRCS has several practices with practice standards and payment scenarios and guidance documents that we've worked together with NRCS to develop. And these are really the backbone of that one-on-one support for site design and then cost share applications. And some of this hasn't been widely used, or it's new, or it's gone on and off the books. And so we're working with NRCS to help make this more well-known and available, but discussions like this one today are a good way for us to do that. And so encourage you to connect with both your local NRCS and county conservation staff to make sure that that there's awareness that this is available, and that Savannah Institute technical service providers are also available to work with landowners and conservation staff for landowners who want to do this. I also want to mention our Agroforestry for Water Quality initiative. This has been funded by several grants from the EPA, the Great Lakes Protection Fund, and Wisconsin Conservation Innovation Grant. And so this is a pretty ambitious series of outreach and engagement programs. And so if you'd like to learn more about where we'll be doing this and what it includes, if you'd like to host one of these events, or you know of farmers and landowners who are particularly motivated for water quality and may want to adopt agroforestry as a part of their water quality programs, that's something that we have a lot of efforts going towards at the moment, and for the next few years at least. I mentioned our demonstration farm network. This is at the moment 4 farms in Illinois and in Wisconsin. Silverwood County Park is near Edgerton in southeast Dane County. And so for those of you who are in southern Wisconsin, I encourage you to come visit us there and see the alley cropping demonstration that we've established in cooperation with Dane County Parks, who owns the land, and farmer Mark Dudla, who is continuing to raise crops in the alleys between the trees that we manage. So it's a great collaboration and an opportunity to see how alley cropping works in action. We're also in the early stages of developing a home base for the organization around Spring Green, Wisconsin. And that's what this sketch of a map on the left of your screen here is the area around Spring Green. And we've been very fortunate through some extraordinary generosity of landowners and donors to have come into stewardship of 3 farms around Spring Green. And each of the farms, for those of you who know the Driftless area, you know each farm is quite unique and different. And so the North Farm is a pretty typical working farm for this part of the state. It's just over 300 acres. And so our intent there is to demonstrate how does agroforestry work on a typical working farm. And we've got a great cooperation established with a dairy farm next door that's been leasing the land for many years. And so they are continuing to grow their crop and their forages in the alleys between the trees there in an alley cropping system. So you can see how agroforestry can work on a working dairy there. The Valley Farm, that's flat Wisconsin River Valley land, and because it's fairly uniform there, it's well suited for research purposes. And so we're working there on our long-term ecological research and plant breeding, and it's well suited for that. And then the South Farm is in the Lowry Creek watershed, and so joins a community there of very innovative and progressive farmers, ranging from cash grain to grazing to specialty crops who've organized around water quality. So it's a great group of farmers, and it's an area where there's a lot of public traffic too. It's a stone's throw from Taliesin and American Players Theater, and it's a very diverse farm there with the creek, the sugar maple stand, a mature stand of black locust, a variety of soil types. And so what we're working on there is developing a wide variety of different types of agroforestry with an eye primarily towards public outreach and some beginner training, so people can get exposed to a lot of the different possibilities of agroforestry all in one place. And so encourage you to come visit us in Spring Green and learn about what we're doing there and be a part of it if you'd like to. I want to just briefly mention our research and commercialization programs. I've mentioned our efforts to breed crops. We're working on a portfolio of crops now that include hazelnut, chestnut, currant, elderberry, and several others we're just getting started with. Technology development and GIS tools, farm management techniques to effectively raise these crops, and then the environmental impacts of these crops and cropping systems and carbon sequestration and water quality especially. And then not just looking on farm, but also beyond the farm gate into supply chains and what sort of interventions are needed there to make these crops viable. And in some cases, starting to pilot or incubate commercial strategies in the nonprofit. And so we've taken sort of stepping back and taking a broad view of what's needed on a crop by crop basis to extend viability. And so you can see, if you want to learn more about those efforts on our website, we have what we've called impact investment reports. And this looks at what are the investments needed, both in terms of capital, research, businesses, public sector, in order to make these crops viable. And so taking a deep dive on chestnuts and hazelnuts, and then looking at some small fruit crops too that we think have a lot more potential in Wisconsin and beyond. I mentioned the business that we've recently launched, Canopy Farm Management, and this is an effort to add capacity for farmers and landowners who are looking for custom work and don't want to do it all themselves. And we've seen a need for this for many years, and have been able to stand it up now and offer these services to landowners, and to do it outside of the nonprofit in a business so that we can stay focused in the nonprofit on our research and education mission, but also be able to extend this to landowners and farmers who need it. So there's a lot of ways that you can get involved if you'd like to learn more or be a part of it. As I mentioned, we'll have events and field days published for the year ahead soon. Including on Friday, if you'd like to join us virtually for the Perennial Farm Gathering. The highlight of that, I have a slide up for it here, but I'll tell you now, is what we call the Nutshell Show and Tells, where anybody who wants to, who tunes in as we have time, can take 5 minutes to say who they are, where they are, what they're interested in, and what they're working on. So it's a great opportunity to learn from each other and network. We have a lot of our research and resources available on our website. I mentioned our monthly newsletter, and you can certainly get in touch with me or any of our staff with questions that you might have as well. Do hope I'll see you on Friday. And then if you really want to take a deep dive on agroforestry, I also wanted to highlight that for the first time in 20 years, the International World Congress on Agroforestry is in North America. So if you want to take a trip to Canada this summer, come join some of our staff there as well. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions that the board might have. Thanks again for the opportunity to present.
Thank you very much, Keith. An excellent presentation, and I can certainly recommend people get your newsletter and subscribe to that and visit your website. I've watched several of the videos, and just extremely informational, and allow your mind to expand on what some of these opportunities are as the Land and Water Board looks for support for innovative agriculture. We definitely need to be aware of what's happening with the Savannah Institute. So thank you very much. We had one guest who had a question for a long time, Dean Farr. We'll let Dean go